A poor woman enters the company and announces, she is now the new owner of everything. The millionaire, accustomed to commanding everyone, laughs out loud at that statement. What no one imagined was that she carried a truth capable of turning everything upside down. When the truth appears, the laughter vanishes, and the fate of the company changes forever. If this beautiful story of triumph and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing. The morning in New York City began like all others that August. The grey sky reflected the heavy atmosphere that dominated the 14th floor of the commercial building on Fifth Avenue. There, inside a meeting room overlooking the city, 6 executives waited in silence for the arrival of Arthur Sterling, the man who had led Sterling Developments for over 20 years. Arthur was known throughout the New York real estate market. At 57, he had built an empire starting practically from nothing. His trajectory was told as an example of determination and business vision. Office buildings, luxury condos, and large-scale developments scattered across the city bore his mark. But in recent months, something had changed. Sales were falling month after month. Contracts were being cancelled. Partners complained about payment delays. The economic crisis hitting the country seemed to have found a direct target in the company. Marcus Thorne, the chief financial officer, adjusted the papers on the glass table while checking the numbers for the 3rd time that morning. The results remained poor, no matter how many times he redid the calculations. Beside him, Penelope, Arthur's executive secretary for 15 years, organized folders and reports with the efficiency of someone who knew every detail of that routine. The other managers exchanged worried glances, but avoided comments. Everyone knew that Arthur did not tolerate side conversations before meetings. When the door opened, the silence intensified. Arthur entered with firm steps, his navy blue suit impeccable, his grey hair perfectly combed. His face revealed fatigue, but his brown eyes still carried that intensity that intimidated even the most experienced executives. He didn't greet anyone. He simply pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, adjusting his shirt cuffs before looking at Marcus. They began to discuss the numbers. With every page turned, the tension increased. Arthur interrupted constantly, asking direct questions that left the managers uncomfortable. He questioned decisions, pointed out flaws, and demanded explanations that were not always satisfactory. His voice, deep and controlled, completely dominated the room. No one dared to contradict him. No one even tried to suggest alternatives that might sound like criticism of how he conducted business. Penelope realized the meeting was headed for another grueling confrontation when the internal phone rang discreetly on the side table. She answered quickly, wanting to avoid another reason for her boss's irritation. The voice of the security guard at the reception sounded low, almost whispering. Penelope frowned, asked him to repeat, and then looked at Arthur with an expression that mixed confusion and embarrassment. Arthur stopped talking mid-sentence and turned his face toward her. His eyes narrowed slightly, a sign that any interruption at that moment had better have a good reason. Penelope swallowed hard before speaking. "There is a woman at the reception who insists on speaking with you, Mr. Sterling. The guard said she doesn't have an appointment and doesn't know anyone at the company, but she claims she needs to talk urgently." He tried to dismiss her, but she remains firm, saying she won't leave until she is received. Arthur huffed, letting out a short, humorless laugh. His fingers drummed once on the table, a gesture everyone there recognized as a sign of extreme impatience. He looked at his wristwatch, an expensive Swiss model that reflected the light from the ceiling fixtures. "We are in the middle of a meeting that defines the future of this company, and someone comes to interrupt me without even having the courtesy to schedule a time. Who is this person? What does she want?" Penelope hesitated before answering. She said her name is Clara Bennett. She didn't want to give more details. She just repeated that she needs to speak with you personally. The name meant nothing to Arthur. He didn't know any Clara Bennett. He had no pending business with anyone by that name. His first reaction was to order her dismissed immediately, but something in the persistence described by the guard sparked a minimal curiosity. Perhaps it was just the fatigue of the stressful routine. Perhaps it was an unconscious desire to postpone that draining meeting for a few more minutes. He raised his hand, making a dismissive gesture. Send her up, but tell her she has exactly 5 minutes, not a second more. Penelope transmitted the order over the phone and returned to her place, watching Arthur return his attention to the reports. Marcus tried to resume the presentation of the numbers, but everyone noticed that the concentration had already been broken. The following minutes seemed to drag on. The room remained silent, only the muffled sound of the traffic below invading the environment through the enormous windows. When the door opened again, all eyes turned to the entrance. A woman entered slowly, and the first impression was one of absolute contrast with everything that environment represented. Clara Bennett appeared to be about 30 years old. Her brown hair was tied in a simple ponytail. She wore faded jeans and a white blouse made of thin fabric, without any detail that suggested refinement. On her feet, flat sandals worn out by use. She carried no designer bag, no jewelry, no elaborate makeup. Her hands held only a worn-out cardboard folder, the kind found in cheap stationery stores. But what drew the most attention was not her modest appearance, it was her gaze. Even in the face of that intimidating setting, Clara did not look away. She walked with calm steps, as if she knew exactly the path she should follow. Her posture was straight, confident, without any sign of nervousness or submission. She stopped a few feet from the table, staring directly at Arthur, who observed her with a mixture of impatience and curiosity. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for receiving me. I know you are busy, so I will get straight to the point." Her voice was firm, clear, without hesitation. Arthur crossed his arms, leaning back in his chair with an expression that made his lack of interest clear. Around the table, the executives exchanged intrigued looks. Marcus suppressed a cynical smile, finding the situation absurd. Penelope remained standing near the door, torn between curiosity and fear of what would come next. "Go ahead, you have 5 minutes." Clara took a deep breath, and then said the words that would completely change the course of that morning. "My name is Clara Bennett, and as of today I am the new owner of this company." The silence that followed was absolute. It lasted only a few seconds, but it seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then Arthur let out a loud, genuine laugh that echoed through the room. He looked around, as if seeking confirmation that everyone there was witnessing this absurd scene. Marcus laughed along, shaking his head in disbelief. Other executives allowed discreet smiles, thinking this could only be some kind of poorly planned prank. Arthur stood up, still laughing, and walked to the window. He turned to Clara with open arms in a theatrical gesture. "So you are the new owner of Sterling Developments. How interesting. And I imagine you arrived here in a limousine, didn't you? Or was it by private helicopter? You must have left your driver waiting downstairs." The laughter of the others intensified. Clara did not react. She remained standing, holding the folder with both hands, keeping her eyes fixed on Arthur. Her expression showed no anger, no embarrassment, only an unshakable calm that contrasted with the generalized mockery. Arthur approached her again, stopping very close to her. His voice took on a harder, sharper tone. "I don't know who you are or what kind of scam you're trying to pull here, but I'll give you a piece of free advice. I built this company brick by brick. I worked day and night for over 20 years to get where I am. No one, do you hear me? No one simply shows up here saying they own what is mine. Now take your things and leave before I call security." Clara did not move. Her hands slightly tightened on the folder, but her voice remained serene when she replied, "I understand your reaction, Mr. Sterling. Truly, my appearance does not match what you would expect from someone in my position, but I have here all the documents that prove what I am saying. If you would allow me just a few minutes to explain." "No, I'm not going to waste my time with this. This conversation is over." Arthur was already turning to return to the table when Clara took a small step forward, raising her voice just enough to make him stop. "Then let me tell you a story, just that. After that, you decide whether or not you want to see the documents." There was something in that request that momentarily disarmed Arthur's aggressiveness. Perhaps it was the courage of that woman to remain there, even while being ridiculed. Perhaps it was just curiosity about what she could invent to sustain such an absurd lie. He looked at his watch again, huffed with impatience, but finally agreed with a brusque gesture of his hand. 3 minutes, and that is very generous of me." Clara thanked him with a small nod. Then she began to speak, and her voice, even while maintaining a calm tone, carried a deep emotion that made everyone pay attention, even against their will. 8 years ago, I was just a 22-year-old woman trying to survive in New York. My father had passed away a few months earlier, the victim of a heart problem the family could never afford to treat properly. My mother, Sarah Bennett, was left alone with me. It was just the two of us. I was studying business at a state college, working during the day as a clerk in a clothing store downtown, and at night I did side jobs as a waitress at events. My mother sewed at home, repaired clothes for neighbors, did whatever she could to help with expenses. We lived in a small apartment in Queens, far from everything, but it was ours. The room was completely silent now. Arthur remained standing, but his expression had changed. The mockery was giving way to genuine curiosity. Marcus had stopped fiddling with the papers. Penelope, leaning against the wall, listened intently to every word. Clara continued, and her voice trembled slightly as she remembered. One day my mother started feeling ill. She had diabetes, but we couldn't buy the medicine properly. That morning she was with me because I had managed to get an extra job serving at a corporate event. It was in a commercial building here on Fifth Avenue. A real estate launch for a large developer. My mother went along because she needed to get the money from my payment to buy food. During the event, she felt dizzy, broke into a cold sweat, and suddenly collapsed on the floor. Clara's breathing became heavier. She closed her eyes for a moment as if reliving that moment. No one wanted to help. People looked, but no one moved. I was desperate, screaming, asking for help, but everyone seemed more concerned with maintaining the elegance of the event than with my mother's life. Until a man approached, a white-haired gentleman, well-dressed with a kind look. He knelt beside my mother, checked how she was, and immediately called for a private ambulance. He paid for everything. He accompanied us to the hospital. He stayed there until he was sure she was stable. Arthur felt a strange tightness in his chest. Something in that story was beginning to awaken memories he preferred to keep dormant. Clara opened her eyes and stared at him directly. That man changed our lives that day, and his name was Albert Bennett, my grandfather. The name echoed through the room like silent thunder. Albert Bennett. Arthur felt his legs go momentarily weak. He gripped the edge of the table, trying to maintain his composure, but his face had lost its color. The executives around noticed the immediate change in his expression. Marcus frowned, confused. Penelope took a step forward, worried about her boss's reaction. Clara observed everything in silence, allowing that name to do its work. She knew exactly the impact it would cause. She waited a few seconds before continuing, giving Arthur time to process the information. "I see you recognize the name," Clara said softly. "My grandfather was a discreet man, Mr. Sterling. He didn't like to show off. He didn't seek the spotlight or public recognition, but those who had the privilege of knowing him knew that Albert Bennett was someone special. He believed that kindness didn't need an audience to exist." Arthur finally managed to speak, but his voice came out hoarse, different from the authoritative tone of minutes ago. "How do you know I knew your grandfather?" "Because he spoke of you many times," Clara replied, "especially in his final months of life. My grandfather had an impressive memory. He remembered every person he had helped, every story he had lived. And you, Arthur Sterling, were among those stories." She opened the worn folder she was holding and took out some old photographs yellowed by time. She walked to the table and placed them before Arthur. He looked down and felt the air leave his lungs. There he was, more than 30 years younger, beside Albert Bennett. The photo had been taken in front of a construction site. Arthur wore simple work clothes, a hard hat on his head, a wide smile on his face. Albert was beside him, with that paternal look Arthur recognized perfectly. Another photo showed the two of them in a small, modest office, surrounded by papers and architectural blueprints. Arthur remembered that day as if it were yesterday. It was the moment Albert had handed him his first big project, the first real opportunity of his career. He felt a lump in his throat. Clara continued speaking, her voice heavy with contained emotion. "You were 26 years old when you met my grandfather. You worked as a junior engineer at a small construction company. You had talent, ambition, but no opportunity to grow. My grandfather saw something in you that others didn't. He gave you the chance to lead an important project, even when everyone said you were too young, too inexperienced." Arthur closed his eyes. Memories flooded his mind like a deluge. Albert Bennett had been his mentor, his guide, the man who believed in him when no one else did. For years they worked together. Albert taught Arthur not just about construction and architecture, but about integrity, about respect, about the importance of treating people well. Arthur remembered the long conversations at the end of the day when Albert would say that success without humanity was worth nothing. But then something had changed. Arthur began to grow, to win his own projects, to build his empire. Visits to Albert became rarer, calls less frequent, the rush of business, the endless meetings, the incessant search for more profit consumed all his time. He vaguely remembered receiving an invitation to Albert's 80th birthday, but he was too busy with an important launch. He promised to visit later, but he never did. And then, a few years ago, he heard that Albert had passed away. He didn't go to the funeral. He sent flowers and a formal card, nothing more. The guilt Arthur had buried deep in his chest now resurfaced with brutal force. He opened his eyes and looked at Clara, who observed him with an expression that mixed understanding and sadness. "My grandfather never held a grudge against you," she said softly. "He understood that life sometimes takes us on different paths, but he also noticed that something had changed in you, that the humble and dreaming young engineer had given way to a hard and distant businessman. That saddened him deeply." Clara's words hit Arthur like precise blows. He turned to the window, unable to face the gazes of those present. Outside, New York followed its frantic pace, indifferent to the drama unfolding in that room. Clara took a deep breath before continuing. "In the final years of his life, my grandfather organized his assets. He had some properties, investments, and also stakes in companies, among them this one, Sterling Developments. You never knew, but my grandfather was one of the main silent investors in this company. He put money here more than 20 years ago when you were still starting out and needed capital to expand." Arthur turned sharply. "That's not possible. I know all my investors. Albert never appeared in any document, in any shareholders' meeting, because he didn't want you to know," Clara explained. "My grandfather believed that if you found out you might feel indebted, embarrassed. He didn't want that. He just wanted to see you grow. That's why he invested through funds and shell companies. Legally, everything was recorded, but in a way that his name would never appear directly." She took more documents from the folder. They were old contracts, transfer records, minutes of the formation of holding companies, all signed, stamped, with the proper notary registrations. Clara handed the papers to Arthur, who began to read with trembling hands. Marcus stood up and went to him, reading over his shoulder. The CFO's expression gradually changed from skepticism to absolute shock. "Arthur, this is all correct," Marcus whispered. "The records match, the dates, the amounts, the signatures, it's all legitimate." Arthur continued leafing through the documents as if he expected to find some flaw, some error that would prove it was an elaborate fraud. But there was nothing. Every paper was perfect, every signature authentic. He immediately recognized Albert's handwriting on several pages, that firm and elegant script that used to appear in the drafts of old projects. Clara then took the last document from the folder. "This is my grandfather's will," she said. "It was registered 3 years ago, a few months before he passed away. In it, my grandfather leaves clear instructions about the fate of his assets. Most was destined for charities helping needy families in New York, but the shares in this company, which represent 52% of the voting control, were left to me." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Arthur took the will with fingers that trembled visibly. He read every line with obsessive attention. Marcus took a copy and did the same. Penelope approached, looking over the CFO's shoulder. Everyone desperately sought some loophole, some irregularity. They found nothing. The signature at the end of the document was unmistakable. Albert Bennett had signed that will in the presence of 3 witnesses and a notary. Everything was in accordance with the law. Everything was valid. And the direct beneficiary of the shares of Sterling Developments was Clara Bennett, identified as the deceased's only granddaughter. Arthur let himself fall into the chair. His breathing was irregular. His hands squeezed the paper so hard that the edges began to crumple. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. All the arrogance, all the unshakable security that characterized him had disappeared. In its place remained only a man confronted with a truth he was not prepared to accept. Clara remained standing, observing everyone's reaction with impressive serenity. She knew that moment would be difficult, but she also knew it was necessary. After a few minutes of heavy silence, she spoke again. "I understand the shock this causes, Mr. Sterling. I also understand that my appearance does not match what you would expect from someone in this position. But my grandfather had his reasons for doing what he did. He believed I could bring something different to this company, something it has lost over the years." Arthur raised his face, his red eyes fixing on her. "And what would that be? What do you, a girl who shows up here without any experience, without any knowledge of this market, think you can bring to a company I built with my own hands?" His voice came out choked, heavy with pain and revolt. Clara did not back down. She took a step forward, her voice gaining a firmness that made everyone pay attention. "Humanity, Mr. Sterling. Respect, empathy. The same things my grandfather tried to teach you 30 years ago. The same things you forgot along the way." The sentence fell like a bomb. Arthur clenched his fists, his jaw tightening with anger. Marcus looked at the floor, uncomfortable. The other executives exchanged tense glances. No one had ever spoken to Arthur Sterling like that. No one dared to confront him that way. Clara continued, her voice softer now but still full of determination. "My grandfather left a letter with the will, a letter addressed to you. He asked me to read it to you when this moment arrived." She took a yellowed envelope from the folder. The handwriting on the front was Albert's, and it simply said, "For Arthur." Clara opened the envelope carefully and unfolded the handwritten pages. She began to read aloud, and the entire room seemed to transform as the words of the old mentor echoed through the environment. "Dear Arthur, if you are hearing these words, it means Clara has finally reached you. I know you must be shocked, perhaps even angry. Forgive me for not telling you about my investment in your company. I did it because I wanted your success to be genuinely yours, without you feeling indebted to me. You were always like a son to me, Arthur. I always believed in your potential, your vision, your talent. But in recent years, I have observed with sadness how you have changed. The kind and dreaming young man I knew has given way to a hardened, distant man who has forgotten that true success is not measured only in numbers and material achievements. That is why I made this decision. Leaving the company shares to Clara is not a way to punish you or take what is yours. It is an attempt to bring back what you have lost. My granddaughter carries within her the values I tried to teach you. She understands that people matter, that kindness is not weakness, that leading with empathy does not mean being less competent. My wish is that you work together, that Clara brings back the humanity the company has lost, and that you, with all your experience and talent, can rediscover the man you once were. This is my last lesson for you, Arthur. I hope you accept it with an open heart. With eternal affection, Albert." When Clara finished reading, tears were streaming silently down Arthur's face. He didn't try to hide them. For the first time in years, he allowed his emotions to come to the surface. His shoulders shook slightly as he held his face in his hands, trying to compose himself. The executives around were equally moved. Penelope discreetly wiped her eyes. Marcus swallowed hard, unable to speak. Clara folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table in front of Arthur. Then she took a step back, allowing him to have his moment of privacy, even while surrounded by people. She waited patiently, without haste, without demands. When Arthur finally raised his face, his eyes met Clara's. There was a vulnerability there that no one had ever seen in the powerful businessman. He wiped his tears with the back of his hand and took several deep breaths before he could speak. "You have the documents. You have the legal rights. You have control of the company. What do you intend to do now?" Clara looked around the room, observing every person present. Then she turned her eyes back to Arthur and replied with the same calm she had maintained since entering that room. "I intend to honor my grandfather's memory. I intend to transform this company into a place where people are treated with dignity, where success and humanity walk together. And I intend to do that with your help, Mr. Sterling, if you are willing to accept." Arthur closed his eyes, letting those words sink deep into his heart. When he opened them again, something had changed in his gaze. It wasn't yet complete acceptance, but it was the beginning of an understanding. the beginning of a journey back to the man he had once been. The following days were the strangest Sterling developments had experienced in its entire history. News of the change in command spread like wildfire through the company. Employees from different sectors whispered in the corridors, speculated in the break rooms, and exchanged messages filled with doubt and concern. No one knew exactly what to expect from this simple woman who had arrived so unexpectedly. Clara arrived on her first official day as owner, wearing even more modest clothes than those from the initial meeting. Simple black pants, a white cotton blouse, and the same worn shoes. She had not tried to fit the corporate standard of the environment. She didn't use elaborate makeup or expensive accessories. She was exactly who she had always been, and that caused discomfort in many people. Penelope received her at the reception with a mixture of formal respect and poorly disguised curiosity. She led Clara to what was previously Arthur's office. The businessman had agreed to vacate the space, moving to a smaller office on the same floor. The transition had been silent, but everyone noticed the symbolic weight of that gesture. When Clara entered the luxurious office, her first reaction was visible discomfort. She looked around, observing the fine wood furniture, the marble floor, the artwork on the walls, and the privileged view of Fifth Avenue. Everything there breathed power and ostentation. She walked to the leather armchair behind the enormous desk and sat down slowly, as if testing whether that place really belonged to her. Penelope remained at the door, waiting for instructions. Clara looked at her and smiled kindly. "Come in, Penelope, I would like to talk to you." The secretary entered, closing the door behind her. She sat in the chair Clara indicated, maintaining the straight and professional posture she had cultivated for years. Clara rested her elbows on the desk and interlaced her fingers, studying the woman in front of her. "I know this must all be very strange for you," Clara began. "How long have you worked with Mr. Sterling?" 15 years, Penelope replied. "I started as an administrative assistant and was promoted to executive secretary 8 years ago." "Then you know this company better than most people. You know the processes, the people, the culture." Clara paused. "I need your help, Penelope. I need to understand how things really work here, not just the official reports, but how people feel, how they are treated, what needs to change." Penelope blinked, surprised. No one had ever asked for her opinion on such matters. During all those years, her role had always been to execute orders, organize schedules, and solve operational problems, never to participate in strategic decisions or express personal views about the company. "I don't know if I'm the right person for that," she whispered. "My work has always been more administrative." Clara shook her head. "That is exactly why you are the right person. You see everything, Penelope. You are present in meetings, you hear the conversations, you notice when someone is overwhelmed or unhappy. I want you to be my bridge to the people of this company. I want you to help me understand what they need." For the first time in a long time, Penelope felt that her presence there had value beyond mechanical tasks. She took a deep breath and agreed with a nod. Clara smiled, grateful, and then asked the first question that would begin a series of revealing conversations. In the following weeks, Clara established a routine that disconcerted everyone. Instead of spending the day locked in the office in meetings with executives, she circulated through the company floors. She visited different departments, talked to employees at all levels, and asked questions about each person's work. She ate lunch in the staff cafeteria instead of frequenting exclusive restaurants. She greeted security guards, janitors, and interns by name. At first, people reacted with suspicion. They thought it was some kind of test, a strategy to identify who criticized the company or who was dissatisfied. But over time, they realized Clara was genuine. She really cared, she really listened, and more importantly, she really acted based on what she heard. One of the first cases happened in the 3rd week. Clara was in the finance department when she noticed an employee, Catherine, working alone in a side room, even though it was almost 7 in the evening. The woman appeared to be in her mid-40s, had deep, dark circles under her eyes, and was typing frantically on her computer. Clara knocked lightly on the door. Catherine raised her face, startled. Seeing Clara, she became even more tense, fearing she was in trouble for staying past hours without prior authorization. Clara entered slowly and pulled up a chair, sitting beside her. "Is everything okay?" Clara asked with genuine concern. Yes, Miss Bennet. I'm just finishing some reports that need to be ready by tomorrow morning. Clara looked at the computer screen, and then at the pile of papers beside it. And do you usually stay late like this? Catherine hesitated before answering. Lately, yes. The department is short-handed after the recent cuts, so the workload has increased significantly. But it's fine. I can handle it. Clara noticed the fatigue in her voice. And your family? Do you have children? I have two, an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. Catherine smiled sadly. They must be asleep by now. My mother looks after them when I need to stay late. And does this happen often? Catherine lowered her eyes. Almost every day in the last few weeks. Clara remained silent for a few moments, processing that information. Then she stood up and placed her hand on Catherine's shoulder kindly. Tomorrow morning, I want you in my office. We will talk about this calmly. The next day, Clara gathered Marcus and the other finance managers. She questioned the workload distribution in the sector, the staff cuts that had been made, and the goals established. Marcus tried to justify the decisions with arguments of cost containment and operational efficiency. Clara listened to him patiently, but then she presented a proposal that left everyone speechless. We are going to rehire 2 people for finance, and we are going to revise the goals to ensure they are challenging, but not impossible. No one should have to choose between work and family every day. Marcus tried to argue that this would increase the company's fixed costs at a time of crisis. Clara looked at him firmly. And what is the cost of having exhausted, stressed, and unhappy employees? What is the cost of losing good professionals because they can no longer stand the pressure? What is the cost of children who grow up without seeing their parents? The room went silent. No one had an answer to those questions. Clara continued, her voice maintaining a calm but determined tone. We are going to do things differently. We are going to prove that it is possible to have a profitable and at the same time humane company. The changes began to happen gradually. Clara implemented flexible hours for parents. She created a free psychological support program for all employees. She established a policy of respect that prohibited shouting, humiliation, or any kind of degrading treatment. She increased maternity and paternity leave beyond what the law required. She opened direct communication channels where any employee could report problems without fear of retaliation. Not everything was accepted easily. Some older executives saw those measures as signs of weakness. They complained that the company was turning into a non-profit instead of a competitive business. Marcus discreetly led this resistance group, arguing in closed meetings that Clara was destroying everything Arthur had built. Arthur, for his part, watched everything from his new office. In the first few days, he had kept his distance, almost absent. He participated only in mandatory meetings, answered questions when asked, but did not offer opinions. He was in a complex internal process, fighting against his own wounded pride, and at the same time beginning to see uncomfortable truths about himself. One day, he witnessed a scene that marked him deeply. He was walking down the hall when he saw Clara helping a mailroom clerk who had tripped and dropped a box of documents. She didn't just help pick up the papers. She sat on the floor beside the young man, organizing everything carefully. She talked to him, asked about his day, and treated him with the same consideration she would show a director. Arthur stopped a few feet away, watching. There were no cameras there was no audience. Clara didn't do that to be seen or praised. She did it because it was who she was. And at that moment, Arthur remembered Albert. He remembered how his mentor treated everyone from the company president to the janitor with the same genuine respect. He remembered when he himself acted that way, before success hardened his heart. That night, Arthur stayed late in his office. For the first time in years, he wasn't working. He was just thinking, reflecting on the choices he had made, on the man he had become, on the legacy he was building. He opened his desk drawer and took out the letter Albert had left for him. He read every word again, and this time he allowed them to truly penetrate his heart. My wish is that you work together, the words echoed in his mind, that Clara brings back the humanity the company has lost, and that you, with all your experience and talent, can rediscover the man you once were. Arthur closed his eyes and, for the first time in decades, allowed himself to feel the pain of having distanced himself from Albert, to feel the shame of having forgotten the values that were once so important to him, to feel the weight of the people he had hurt with his coldness and arrogance, and to feel also something he hadn't felt in a long time, a genuine desire to change. When he left the office that night, it was past 10. The building was almost empty. Only a few security guards and a cleaning crew working on the lower floors. Arthur walked to the elevator, but before pressing the button, he looked back. The door to Clara's office was ajar and there was a light on inside. He hesitated. After a few seconds, he walked over and knocked lightly on the door. Clara raised her face from some documents she was studying and seemed surprised to see him. Arthur entered slowly, maintaining a respectful distance. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Clara nodded and pointed to the chair in front of her. Arthur sat down, and for the first time since that shocking first encounter, the two looked at each other not as adversaries, but as two people trying to find a common path. "I have been observing the changes you are implementing," Arthur began, his voice low, "and I must admit that—" Clara raised her hand, interrupting him gently. "Before you continue, I need to tell you something." She took a deep breath. "I didn't come here to prove you were wrong, Mr. Sterling. I came because my grandfather believed that together we could create something better. He always spoke of your talent, your vision for business. Those qualities haven't disappeared, they just got hidden behind other things." Arthur felt a lump in his throat. He knew exactly what those things were: pride, unbridled ambition, fear disguised as authority. "I would like to learn from you," Clara continued. "Learn about management, about the market, about everything you've built over these years, but I would also like you to allow me to share what my grandfather taught me, about how to lead without losing your humanity." Arthur was silent for a long moment. Then, with a choked voice he could barely control, he said the words he had needed to say for weeks. "I would like that, very much." And there, in that office lit by the soft light of the New York night, two worlds began to meet. The world of experience and technical knowledge, and the world of empathy and kindness. Neither of them knew yet how difficult it would be to unite these two visions. They couldn't even imagine the challenges that would come, but for the first time since Clara had arrived, there was something that wasn't there before: hope. 2 months had passed since Clara's arrival, and Sterling Developments was undergoing a transformation that no one would have imagined possible. The atmosphere in the corridors had visibly changed. Employees talked with more lightness, smiled more often, and seemed less overwhelmed. Stories about the new owner circulated through the company like urban legends. They said she had personally helped an intern who had a panic attack during a presentation. They told how she had paid out of her own pocket for the dental treatment of a security guard whose health plan didn't cover the procedure. They reported that she spent hours listening to suggestions for improvements coming from the simplest sectors. But it wasn't all roses. Resistance to the changes was gaining strength among part of the board. Marcus Thorne had become the unofficial spokesperson for this group. In executive meetings, he constantly questioned Clara's decisions, always backed by numbers and projections that painted a bleak picture. He argued that costs were rising, that profit margins were being compromised, and that the company was losing competitiveness by adopting social policies that competitors did not have. On a cloudy October afternoon, the tension finally exploded. Clara had called a meeting with all the directors to present the results of the last few months. The room was full. In addition to the usual executives, there were managers from different areas and some coordinators. Clara wanted transparency. She wanted everyone to understand the company's reality. She began the presentation by showing the financial numbers. As Marcus had predicted, operational costs had increased. The new hires, the employee support programs, the expanded benefits, all of that had a price. Revenue, on the other hand, had not yet shown significant growth. Some projects were delayed. 2 major clients had cancelled contracts, citing changes in investment priorities. Marcus shifted in his chair, preparing for his attack. But before he could speak, Clara showed other data. Employee turnover had dropped by half. Requests for medical leave due to stress and burnout had decreased drastically. Individual productivity had increased in almost all sectors. Internal organizational climate assessments showed satisfaction rates the company had never achieved. But Clara didn't stop there. She brought something no one expected: testimonials. Employees of different levels had recorded short videos telling how the changes had impacted their lives. Catherine, from finance, appeared on the screen explaining that for the first time in years, she was able to have dinner with her children every day. An engineer told how the psychological support had helped him overcome a severe depression that almost made him give up his career. A receptionist thanked the respect policy that had ended the moral harassment she suffered from a manager. One by one, the testimonials were shown, and the room was taken by a heavy silence. When the last video ended, Clara turned off the projector and turned to those present. "I know the financial numbers worry you. They worry me too. But we need to understand that we are planting seeds. A company doesn't change overnight. We are building a new culture, and culture takes time to generate concrete results." Marcus could no longer contain himself. He stood up from his chair, his voice coming out louder than he intended. "Culture doesn't pay the bills, Clara. Emotional testimonials don't prevent bankruptcy. We are losing money, losing clients, losing market space. And all of this because you decided to turn this company into a social experiment." The entire room became tense. Some executives agreed with discreet nods. Others looked at the floor, uncomfortable with the confrontation. Clara remained calm, but her voice gained a firmness that everyone recognized as inflexible. "I understand your concern, Marcus, and I respect your perspective, but I fundamentally disagree with your vision. We are not conducting a social experiment. We are building a sustainable long-term company, a company where people want to work, where talent wants to stay, where there is genuine loyalty and commitment." Marcus laughed sarcastically. "Loyalty doesn't build skyscrapers, Clara. Contracts build skyscrapers. And we are losing contracts because our competitors can offer better prices, prices we could achieve if we weren't spending fortunes on welfare policies." Before Clara could reply, a deep voice cut through the air. It was Arthur. He had remained silent throughout the meeting, observing everything from his place at the corner of the table. Now he stood up, resting his hands on the glass surface, his gaze fixed on Marcus. "You are wrong, Marcus." Everyone turned to him, surprised. Arthur rarely intervened in meetings since Clara had taken command. Marcus seemed disconcerted, but maintained a defiant posture. "So you built this company, Arthur. You know better than anyone that in the business world profit comes first. It has always been that way." Arthur shook his head slowly. "That is how I used to think. That is how I conducted things. And do you know what I achieved? I built a profitable company. But I lost my humanity in the process. I lost the connection with people. I lost friends. I lost the admiration of the man who taught me everything. I gained money, but I lost much more." The silence in the room was absolute. No one had ever heard Arthur Sterling speak like this. He continued, his voice heavy with contained emotion. "For years, I treated employees as numbers, as disposable resources. I thought I was being strong, efficient, but in fact, I was being a coward. It is much easier to fire someone when you don't see the person behind the ID badge. It is much easier to demand absurd overtime when you don't know the children waiting at home. I did all of that, Marcus, and look where it led us. To a company in crisis, with demotivated employees, with a reputation as a toxic place to work." Marcus tried to interrupt, but Arthur raised his hand, asking for silence. "Clara is doing something I should have done years ago. She is reminding all of us that a company is made of people, and when you take care of people, when you treat them with dignity and respect, they reciprocate with loyalty, with creativity, with genuine dedication. This is not welfare, it is management intelligence." He turned to Clara, and for the first time since she had arrived, everyone saw genuine gratitude in the businessman's eyes. "You are teaching me to be the man I was before I forgot what really matters. And for that, I thank you." Clara felt her eyes well up, but she held back the tears. She smiled at Arthur, a small but significant smile. Marcus remained standing, but his posture had lost its aggressiveness. He looked around, realizing he no longer had allies in that room. Even those who previously agreed with him seemed touched by Arthur's words. With contained anger, Marcus grabbed his papers and left the room, slamming the door behind him. No one stopped him. Clara took a deep breath before continuing the meeting, now with a completely different atmosphere. In the following weeks, unexpected changes began to happen. The story of Sterling Development's transformation began to circulate in the market. Magazines specialized in business management wrote articles about the case. Universities asked for permission to study the model implemented by Clara. And something surprising happened. Talented professionals from other companies began to seek openings at Sterling. One of these professionals was Liam Foster, an award-winning architect who worked for one of the largest competitors. He scheduled an interview directly with Clara, saying he wanted to be part of that transformation. During the conversation, Liam explained that he was tired of the toxic environment where he worked, where results mattered more than people, where creativity was stifled by pressure and fear. Clara hired him immediately, and Liam brought with him 3 other architects from his old office. Together, they began to develop innovative projects for Sterling, proposals that combined sustainability, bold design, and social consciousness. One of these projects caught the attention of a large international client who had rejected the company months before. They wanted a development that valued quality of life, green spaces, and social inclusion, exactly what the new Sterling was proposing. The contract was signed in November. It was the largest deal closed by the company in 3 years. News spread quickly, and even Marcus had to recognize, albeit reluctantly, that the changes were starting to generate concrete results. But the most striking moment of that period happened on a Friday afternoon. Clara was walking down the hall when she heard heated voices coming from a meeting room. She immediately recognized Arthur's voice. He was in a heated discussion with a supplier on the phone. Clara stopped at the ajar door, watching. The supplier had delivered materials of lower quality than contracted, and Arthur was demanding explanations. But unlike what he would have done years ago, he wasn't shouting. He wasn't humiliating anyone. His voice was firm but controlled. His words were direct but respectful. He demanded solutions but was willing to hear the other side's version. When the call ended, Arthur noticed Clara at the door. She entered with a smile and sat across from him. "You are different," she said softly. Arthur leaned back in his chair and let out a long sigh. "I'm trying. It's not easy to unlearn decades of habits, but I'm trying. For weeks I've been rereading old notes I made when I worked with your grandfather. He always said that authority comes from respect, not fear." Clara nodded. "He used to say that to me too. He would repeat that true strength lies in kindness." The two were silent for a few moments, sharing that memory of Albert. Then Arthur said something he had been holding back for weeks. "You know, Clara, when you arrived here, I hated you. I hated what you represented. I hated having to admit that my way of conducting things was wrong. But now I thank you. You gave me something I didn't know I needed. A second chance to be the man I should have always been." Clara felt the tears finally roll down. She didn't try to hide them. She stood up and walked to Arthur, placing a hand on his shoulder. "My grandfather believed in you, Arthur. He knew that this man still existed behind all the layers of pain and disappointment. He just needed a push to come back." Arthur covered Clara's hand with his own, squeezing with gratitude. And at that moment he finally understood the true gift Albert had left. It wasn't the company. It wasn't the shares or the controlling interest. It was the opportunity for redemption, the chance to correct the mistakes of the past and build a different future. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over New York. The city continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding in its buildings. But inside that room, 2 people had found something rare and precious. They had found mutual understanding. They had found shared purpose. And above all, they had found hope that real change was possible when courage and kindness walked together. Winter arrived in New York, bringing with it not only the characteristic July cold, but also an unexpected storm that would test everything Clara and Arthur had built in the last few months. The news arrived on a Monday morning through a call that made Arthur's blood run cold. The bank responsible for financing the company's largest project had decided to review the terms of the contract. They wanted additional guarantees, higher rates, and shorter deadlines. The justification was technical, but everyone knew the truth. They were insecure with the changes in the company. Arthur hung up the phone and immediately called Clara to his office. When she arrived, she found the businessman with an expression she hadn't seen in months. Tension was back in his shoulders, hardness in his eyes. He explained the situation with a controlled voice, but Clara noticed the deep concern behind every word. "If we can't renegotiate these terms, we're going to have to stop the work. And if we stop, we lose the contract with the international client, It's a chain reaction that could destroy everything we're trying to build. Clara sat down slowly, processing the information. She felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. Were those changes she had implemented, that culture of kindness and respect she defended so much, now putting jobs at risk? Had she been too naive to think she could transform a company without consequences? Arthur observed the change in her expression and felt a pang of guilt. He realized Clara was taking all the responsibility herself, as if this crisis were her exclusive fault. He stood up and walked over to stand beside the chair where she was sitting. "Clara, look at me." She raised her face, and Arthur saw vulnerability in those eyes that always seemed so secure. "This is not your fault. The market has always been unpredictable. Banks have always been conservative. This would have happened anyway. Don't let this situation make you doubt everything you've achieved here. But what if Marcus is right? What if I'm really putting the company at risk with my ideas?" Clara's voice came out small, fragile. "What if all these people who trusted me end up losing their jobs because of my decisions?" Arthur pulled up a chair and sat in front of her, leaning in to ensure eye contact. "You are doing the right thing, Clara. The right way. And do you know how I know that? Because for the first time in years, people in this company wake up wanting to come to work. Because we have a waiting list of talented professionals wanting to be part of this team, because we built something that has value far beyond numbers on spreadsheets." Clara discreetly wiped a tear that threatened to fall. "But what if we lose everything anyway?" Arthur held her hands firmly. "Then we will rebuild, together. But we are not going to give up on what we believe in just because we encountered the first big obstacle. Your grandfather wouldn't have given up, and neither will we." Those words were like a bucket of cold water bringing Clara back to reality. She took several deep breaths, composing herself. Arthur was right. Albert faced countless crises throughout his business life, but never abandoned his principles. If she gave up now at the first serious difficulty, she would be betraying everything he had taught her. "What do we do then?" she asked, her voice recovering its firmness. "We do what we've always done. We work. We think. We find solutions, but this time we do it together." They spent the rest of that day analyzing numbers, reviewing contracts, and looking for alternatives. Marcus was called in to participate in the discussion, and for the first time since the confrontation in the meeting months ago, he collaborated genuinely. His technical skills and deep knowledge of the financial market were fundamental to mapping out possible ways out. At night, when most employees had already gone home, the three were still gathered in Clara's office. Piles of documents covered the table. Empty coffee cups were scattered everywhere. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. "We have an option," he said finally. "We can seek alternative investors. There are funds specialized in companies in transformation with a profile more aligned with what you are doing here. The rates could be even more favorable than the banks." Clara looked at Arthur, hopeful. "Is it viable?" Arthur nodded slowly. "It's risky. It means opening our capital to new partners, losing a bit of autonomy, but yes, it's viable." Marcus hesitated before continuing. "And there's something else. These funds usually demand total transparency. They'll want audits, detailed reports on internal policies, social impact. They're going to investigate every change that was made here." He looked directly at Clara. "If what you built is genuine, if the results are real, they will bet big on this company. But if there is any sign that all of this is just a facade, they'll run faster than the bank." Clara kept her gaze firm. "It's not a facade, Marcus. It never was, and I'm willing to prove it." In the following weeks, Sterling Developments underwent the most intense scrutiny of its history. Auditors went through every department. They interviewed employees randomly, from directors to cleaning staff. They analyzed every policy implemented by Clara, every change in organizational culture, every penny spent on social programs. It was a grueling, invasive process, but necessary. During this period, something unexpected happened. The employees, when questioned about the changes, defended the company with passion. Catherine, from finance, showed the auditors how her productivity had increased since she could better balance work and family. Liam, the architect who had been hired months before, presented innovative projects that were only possible because he felt safe to take creative risks. The security guard whose dental treatment Clara had paid for told how that gesture changed his life and made him work with absolute loyalty. The auditors recorded everything. They compiled data, cross-referenced information, and verified every testimonial. And when they presented the final report to the investment fund, the conclusion was unanimous. Sterling Developments was not just undergoing a cosmetic image change. It was genuinely transforming into a sustainable, profitable, and socially responsible business model. The investment was approved. Not just approved, but celebrated. The fund not only offered the capital necessary to save the ongoing project, but proposed a long-term partnership. They wanted to use Sterling as a case study, as an example that it was possible to unite profit and purpose. When the news arrived, the entire company celebrated. Penelope opened champagne in Clara's office. Employees from different sectors hugged each other in the halls. Even Marcus allowed a genuine smile, something few had seen in recent years. But the one most moved was Arthur. He was in his office when Clara entered with the news. Hearing it, he felt his eyes fill with tears. They weren't tears of sadness, but of deep relief. Relief for having found a different path. Relief for having had the courage to change. Relief for having honored Albert's memory the right way. Clara approached and hugged the businessman. It was a long, sincere hug, heavy with everything they had lived through together in the last few months. When they pulled apart, Arthur held her hands and spoke with a choked voice. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for showing me that there was still time to be a better person." Clara smiled through her own tears. "My grandfather always said that good people sometimes just need someone to believe in them again. I always believed in you, Arthur." That night, Clara stayed alone in her office after everyone had left. She looked out the window at the city lights below. She thought of Albert, of everything he had sacrificed to create that opportunity. She thought of the letter he had left, of the words full of hope that Arthur and she could work together to create something special. She took a photo from her pocket that she always carried with her. It was an old image, yellowed by time. It showed Albert holding a small girl in his lap. Clara was only 5 years old in that photo, but she remembered that day perfectly. She remembered the smell of her grandfather's cologne, the sound of his laughter, the feeling of absolute safety in his arms. She pressed the photo to her chest and closed her eyes. "Thank you, Grandpa," she whispered to the silence of the room. "Thank you for believing I could do this. Thank you for giving me this chance to honor your memory. I hope you're proud." And somewhere beyond human understanding, perhaps Albert really was watching. Perhaps he was smiling to see his granddaughter and his old pupil finally united, finally transforming the company into everything he always dreamed it could be. Perhaps he was at peace knowing that his last gift to the world was not money or properties, but the opportunity for redemption and transformation. Outside, New York remained alive, pulsing, indifferent. But inside that room, a young woman felt the invisible presence of her grandfather, blessing everything she had achieved. And for the first time since Albert had left, Clara felt that she was finally living up to the legacy he had left. Not just managing assets or running companies, but transforming lives, changing cultures, and proving that kindness and success could walk hand in hand. The future was still uncertain. Challenges would still come. But Clara and Arthur now knew that together, guided by the values Albert so cherished, they could face any storm, because they had learned the most important lesson of all. That true success is not measured by what we accumulate, but by what we transform. Not by the power we exercise, but by the lives we touch. And that in the end, the greatest wealth anyone can leave is not in vaults or properties, but in the hearts they managed to change. A year had passed since that first turbulent encounter that changed everything. It was a sunny August morning, and Sterling Developments was celebrating the inauguration of the largest project ever carried out by the company. The development that was nearly lost during the financial crisis now stood imposing in the heart of New York. It wasn't just another office building. It was a complex that included community spaces, green areas accessible to the neighborhood, apartments with subsidized values for middle-income families, and a free professional training center. The inauguration ceremony was full of people: clients, partners, employees, city representatives, journalists, and local residents. Everyone wanted to witness that moment that represented not just the success of a project, but the living proof that it was possible to do business differently Clara was on stage beside Arthur. She wore a simple but elegant outfit, without abandoning the modest essence that had always characterized her. Arthur, for his part, looked like a renewed version of himself. The hard and distant man had given way to someone who smiled easily, who greeted every person with genuine interest, and who finally seemed at peace with himself. When the time came for the speeches, Clara approached the microphone. She looked at the crowd and felt a wave of emotion. She took a deep breath before beginning to speak. A year ago, I arrived at this company carrying only a worn folder of documents and a mission that seemed impossible. Many here laughed at me that day. She smiled, and some people in the audience laughed too, remembering the story that had already become legendary. And I don't blame them. My appearance, my youth, everything indicated that I had no right to be there. Clara paused, allowing her words to resonate. But there was something those people didn't know. I wasn't there by my own merit. I was there because an extraordinary man, my grandfather Albert Bennett, believed that kindness and success could walk together. He dedicated his life to proving that, and when he left, he gave me the responsibility to continue that mission. She pointed to the building behind her. This project is not just concrete and glass. It is the materialization of a dream. The dream that companies can profit without losing humanity, that we can build empires without destroying lives in the process. That true success is measured not only by what we accumulate, but by what we transform. The audience was in absolute silence, hypnotized by her words. Clara continued, her voice gaining strength. But I didn't do this alone. None of this would be possible without every person who decided to believe in this vision, without the employees who embraced the changes even when they seemed scary, without the partners who trusted us when the market doubted, and mainly without a man who had the courage to look inside himself and choose to change. She turned to Arthur, extending her hand to him. The businessman hesitated for a moment, surprised, but then approached. Clara hugged him in front of everyone, and when they separated, his eyes were misty. Arthur Sterling built this company with his own hands. But a year ago, he did something even harder. He rebuilt himself. He had the humility to recognize mistakes, the courage to change, and the wisdom to understand that vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. Today, he is not just my partner. He is my mentor, my friend, and someone I deeply admire. Arthur discreetly wiped a tear. Then he approached the microphone. His voice came out choked when he began to speak. For over 20 years, I built skyscrapers, impressive structures, ambitious projects. I thought that was my legacy. I thought I would be remembered for the developments I left across the city. He looked at Clara before continuing. But I was wrong. My true legacy is not the buildings, it is the people, and I almost lost sight of that. He turned to the audience, his gaze scanning the familiar faces. I saw employees who worked with me for years and never knew my name. I treated partners like numbers on spreadsheets. I put profit above everything, including my own humanity. And in the process, I lost the man I was. I lost the connection with Albert Bennett, the mentor who taught me everything. His voice failed for a moment. He took a deep breath before continuing. When Clara arrived here, she didn't just bring legal documents. She brought back the soul of this company. She brought back the values I had forgotten. And she gave me something I didn't deserve, but that I will carry for the rest of my life. A second chance. Emotion took over the audience. Many employees present wiped away tears. Penelope, who was in the front row, sobbed discreetly. Marcus, who had initially resisted the changes so much, had red eyes. Arthur pointed to the building. This project represents everything we learned together, that it is possible to do business with a conscience, that we can be competitive without being cruel. That true power comes from lifting people up, not subjugating them. And above all, that kindness is not naivety, it is wisdom. He turned to Clara again, and his voice became even more emotional. Clara, you taught me to be human again. You taught me that leading with empathy is not being weak, but being strong enough to care. Thank you for not giving up on me when all the reasons said to do so. Thank you for honoring Albert's memory by bringing back the man he always believed I could be. Clara hugged Arthur again, and this time both cried openly. The audience rose in emotional applause that seemed endless. It was a moment of collective catharsis, where everyone present felt they were witnessing something greater than the simple inauguration of a building. They were witnessing the proof that genuine change is possible. When the applause finally ceased, Clara asked for silence for one last announcement. Today we are inaugurating not only this development, but also a foundation. The Albert Bennett Foundation will be dedicated to supporting companies that want to follow this path of transformation. We will offer free consulting, share our model, and help other entrepreneurs discover that success and humanity are not opposites. She made a significant pause. And to lead this foundation, I invited someone whose journey of transformation can inspire thousands of people, someone who proved that it is never too late to change. Arthur Sterling has accepted the presidency of the foundation. Surprise and emotion exploded again. Arthur didn't know about this public invitation. Clara had planned everything as a way to honor him and at the same time challenge him to carry forward Albert's mission. He looked at her with deep gratitude and nodded, accepting that responsibility with the weight it deserved. After the ceremony, while people circulated through the space celebrating, Clara stepped away discreetly. She walked to a more reserved area of the complex, where there was a small plaza with wooden benches and young trees. There, she sat alone, watching the movement from a distance. Arthur found her a few minutes later. He sat beside her in silence, respecting her moment of reflection. They stayed like that for a few moments, just watching the happy people, the children running, the life happening in that space they had helped create. "Your grandfather would be very proud," Arthur said finally, "of what you built here, of what you did for so many people, of what you did for me." Clara smiled, but her eyes remained fixed on the distance. "Do you know what moves me most, Arthur? It's not the building, it's not the numbers, it's not the recognition. It's realizing how many lives were touched. Catherine now sees her children grow up. Liam found a place where his creativity is valued. Hundreds of employees wake up happy to work. And you found your humanity again." She finally looked at him. "That is my grandfather's legacy. Not the money he left, not the properties, not the shares. It is the transformation he continues to cause through us." Arthur nodded, deeply understanding those words. Then he took something from his inner jacket pocket. It was an old envelope. He opened it carefully and showed it to Clara. It was another letter from Albert, but this one was addressed to both of them. "I found this in the documents Albert left. It was marked to be opened only after 1 year. He held out the letter to Clara. "I think we should read it together." Clara took the paper with trembling hands. She immediately recognized her grandfather's handwriting. She began to read aloud, and Albert's words echoed through time. "Dear Clara and Arthur, if you are reading this letter, it means you succeeded. It means you found a path together, that you overcame the differences, the challenges, the doubts. I always knew you two were the pieces missing from each other. Clara had the goodness and the values, but needed to learn about the business world. Arthur had the talent and the experience, but had lost his human essence. Together, you are invincible. My last wish is that you continue proving to the world that kindness is not weakness, that empathy is not naivety, that it is possible to build empires without destroying souls. You are my greatest pride, my greatest achievement. Live in a way that makes others want to be better. That is how we change the world. With eternal love, Albert." When Clara finished reading, tears were flowing freely down her face. Arthur was also crying, without shame, without hiding. The two hugged there in that silent plaza, feeling Albert's invisible but powerful presence surrounding them. "We are going to honor this," Clara whispered. "We are going to keep proving he was right." "Every day," Arthur replied, "for the rest of our lives." They remained sitting there as the sun began to set over New York. The city continued its frantic pace, millions of stories happening simultaneously. But in that small corner, two people had found something rare and precious. They had found purpose. They had found redemption. They had found the proof that one person with kindness and determination can change everything. And somewhere beyond human understanding, Albert Bennett smiled. His last gift to the world had not just been shares in a company or material values. It had been the opportunity for transformation, the chance to prove that good always wins when it finds people courageous enough to defend it. The story of Clara and Arthur would spread. It would inspire other entrepreneurs. It would change other companies. It would touch thousands of lives, because they had proven the most important truth of all. That kindness is the most powerful force in the universe. that it doesn't need wealth, titles, or appearances to exist, that even when underestimated or ridiculed, it can reveal truths capable of transforming companies, changing destinies, and touching even the most hardened hearts. And that sometimes, those who seem to have nothing are exactly the ones who carry the strength necessary to change everything. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Clara and Arthur has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it when Clara arrived and was ridiculed? When Arthur finally recognized his mistakes?